talk in the space and be able to refer to the pieces. He, after earning his BFA from Kansas City Art Institute, he moved out east. He's originally from Lebanon. Lebanon. Yes.
Lebanon.
All right, and he moved out east and got his MFA at Rutgers University and has spent the last 10 years as a working artist in New York City and New Jersey. He's taught in the prison system along with other universities, and so over the last year he's been cranking out the majority of these pieces, and they're just beautiful, so thank you for sharing this. So I will let him speak, so without further ado, please welcome me.
Okay, I'm not going to lecture, all right? So I'm just going to talk about this work. First, I want to thank, of course, Rebecca Miller, because I wouldn't necessarily be here if it wasn't for her. She's been very, very nice to give me a class here and there so I can survive, so I can eat. When it comes to this work, I think the first work I want to talk about is right over here. And as Rebecca mentioned, I taught in 6 different New Jersey state prisons for a full year. And this was quite the experience. It was done through Rutgers University in the NJ STEP program. The NJ STEP program is the New Jersey Scholarship and Transformative Educations in Prisons program. And what this program was, it was privately funded. And these incarcerated individuals were guaranteed a 4-year education for free. Most of my students had served long sentences, like 35, 40 years. They were getting ready to become and be up for parole. So with the recidivism rate being what it is, we didn't want these guys to return. So we said, well, let's start off with an education. This education was not an art education, so my class was the only art class inside these prisons. It was not a class that I taught them how to draw or make art, but I encouraged them to draw and make art. It was a lecture course. These pieces over here are art historical pieces. We see Lucas Cranach's piece here is probably the most relevant one, and we see Lady Justice here. I was developing these lectures for these prison courses, and of course, to me, art is very, very different in the outside world than it was inside these prisons. So I had to rethink all the lectures I did before. And a big part of me rethinking things is to directly work on top of artworks. And this one right here is Lady Justice, and it's from Lucas Cranach in the 1500s. And what's interesting about this image is that Lady Justice is not blind. We see our version of her and she is blind. But about 95% of my students in these prisons were minorities. And when we walk into this prison and you have that stark reality staring you in the face, it has meaning. These works, all the square works here, come directly from these prisons. For each homework assignment, I would come up with a theme. One of those themes would be the life drawings. And for the life drawings, I had my students draw something from life, so something they can see. And you can imagine, if you're an inmate, there's not a whole lot around you. So it would be these very simple things. The other part of this assignment was to draw something from imagination. And imagination is endless. So I would end up with these interesting drawings. I took all these drawings from each assignment and combined them together in the computer digitally, and then printed them onto canvas. When I was thinking about these, I kind of came up with the term complex stories. And complex stories was that every single one of these individuals, and the class size was typically around 30, had a story, and a very interesting story. The complex stories is the combination of all these stories. There's also the dual meaning of the complex. When thinking about the prison, you can also call this thing a complex. Let's see, I think this one over here. This is one of the first ones that I made right here. And this is from Mountain View Youth Correctional Facility. facility. And don't let the word youth fool you, because when I say youth, we mean 18 to 27. Because the reality of prison is if you're a 24-year-old and you enter into a maximum security adult prison, it's not going to work out too well for you. So these were very, very young men. The first class was down in the basement, up 2 flights of stairs, across the gym, and through 2 double doors was the closest guard. So it was me and 30 individuals for my first class. The guard within the institution made sure to point out the panic button inside the classroom. So this was the situation you were in, and you had to deal with that situation. How I dealt with that situation is every person who walked in, I held out my hand and I said, "Welcome, brother." And I reminded them that I am not an inmate and I am also not a guard. So I don't apply to your program. We closed the classroom door and no guards were allowed to enter. So this was a free space. My second prison I taught at was Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. This prison is, I think, notoriously known as the prison that the Black Panther Assata Shakur escaped from. I was down in the maximum security unit there. The process of entering this prison worked like this. You walked through, you checked in, you walked through a metal detector, they looked through all your stuff. They drove you down in towards the max unit. You went through a big gate with this razor wire on top. Then you went through another gate with razor wire on top. And then through another little building and through another metal detector where they searched you. And then through another gate with razor wire. And then another gate with razor wire. And then finally into the building. Once you entered the building, you were confronted with this big red steel door. And this door would automatically open because they had cameras. They could tell that you were the professor and you were allowed to enter in here. You had your little badge. And this thing sounded like this. This thing opened with the sound of authority. When I looked at the side of this door, it was like this thick. And once you took a step in, that same door closed behind you. So you were down in the maximum security unit of the women's prison. This particular day was very interesting. And when I walked into the classroom, I had to get there like 30 minutes early, and I looked up at the clock, and the clock was malfunctioning. And the hands on the clock were spinning this fast. And I thought, what a crazy irony it is in a place that's all about time, that time moves like this. If time moves like that for the people incarcerated in there, they would be out by 5 o'clock. No doubt about it. Of course, they scheduled my course to end at 5:30 p.m. And 5:30 p.m. I would have to get out into Jersey traffic. Jersey traffic at 5:30 p.m. could also be known as hell. It is the worst case scenario. You drive and you stop. And then you drive and you stop. And you drive and you stop for about 2.5 hours to get home when it was only about 20 minutes away. New Jersey traffic. That day, which again was a spectacular day, and I believe everything has meaning, I stayed in the slow lane. And as I drove down the slow lane at an even pace, all the cars began to either exit or move into the faster lanes. And everything opened up in front of me. So I decided to title this piece, "The Tortoise and the Hare," which is the lesson of patience. These pieces over here are landscape drawings. While I was teaching in these prisons, it's the most closed-in concrete space you can imagine. And I'm a country boy. I was born in Lebanon, Missouri. So I need nature. So I grab my skateboard and I go out in my neighborhood and I would find these little pieces of nature. So here we see little pieces of nature, and all these are from my little neighborhood in Rahway, New Jersey. And I would take photographs, bring them back, and get lost in these drawings. And it became a therapeutic way for me to sort of deal with all these things that were happening within this prison. The stories could go on and on and on and on and on. Tragedy after tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. All the titles for this exhibition come from a series of writing because I kept a journal while teaching inside these prisons, because everything was happening so fast too that there's no way I could remember all those details. So I wrote them down. This was recently published in the Teaching Artist Journal, and that's where all the titles come from. Once I was done teaching in these prisons, I had learned something. And I always wondered, am I teaching these students or are they teaching me? Because they taught me a lot. And the one thing they did teach me is how important it is to have home, family, and freedom. So every time I'd walk out of that place or those places, I would think of those things. And I would yearn for those things. So in July, after I was done with all these classes, I had did my thing. I spent 10 years in KC, 10 years out on the East Coast. I said, it's time to come home. So when I came home, I started these drawings over here. And these drawings are all etchings by the artist Albrecht Dürer from the 1500s. And I also taught at a community college. And at this community college, I would check out art books once a week. And I taught there for about 6 or 7 years. So I checked out every single art book in the whole entire catalog, I think. And once I ran across this Albrecht Dürer book, and I went to go check it out. And the lady goes to scan it, the librarian lady who knew me well, and it didn't come up. So she hands me the book, and she says, here, you can have this. And I never did open that book until I came home. And once I came home, I started to look at the subject matter. And the subject matter made sense to me. This is the Bible Belt. And I reacted to these things in an emotional way. I figured Dürer can speak of the narrative. He can tell the story. But where's the emotion? And I would act like an expressionist painter. And I'd start to bring color to this. I'd start to act in this thing in a real speedy way. I kind of turned my brain off a little bit. And I just thought about the subject matter. These pieces here lead us into the larger works. You can see over here. And this one, and that one. And these works are a culmination of all the other works. This is all that work, all that time, all those memories, all those words coming together. I think this one's probably the most appropriate one. And here we see the ascending sun. And here the sun has a dual meaning because we see sort of this light being presented as if it could be the sun. And we also see the image of Christ hidden within this nature. Thank you.